Hi, guys, welcome to the Peppy podcast. Welcome, welcome. Today we have Dr. Hayley D Quinn from Australia. Hayley is a mindset and well-being coach. She's a speaker and author of a book called From Self-Neglect to Self-Compassion and also former clinical psychologist. She has her own podcast called Welcome to Self, and she's the past president of Compassionate Mind Australia. Welcome, Hayley.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to speak to you. So, let's begin by talking a little bit about what you do. So, tell us a bit about your job.
So, I work with mainly neurodivergent women and non binary people
Mm-hmm.
to help them really understand themselves better and what they're doing in their work and life, and making sure that's really aligned to how they want to be living. So, I kind of combine my clinical training that I've had plus my own experience, my own lived experience, but also my lived experience as a business owner as well. So I work with a lot of small to sort of medium sized business owners and some corporate leaders as well.
Okay. And can you tell us in your own words, what does self compassion mean to you?
Absolutely. So I always go back to the definition of compassion that Professor Paul Gilbert has come up with. He is the founder of compassion focused therapy, which is a therapy that I was trained in when I was a psychologist, with compassion being the sensitivity to suffering in ourselves and others, with a commitment to alleviate or prevent that suffering. So when we think about self compassion, it's really about recognizing the suffering in ourselves and wanting to do something about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I just want to know, in all the people that come to you for therapy, do you feel that one of the main reasons that people are suffering is because they're quite hard on themselves?
I think as human beings, we are. So I don't actually work clinically anymore. I'm no longer registered as a psychologist. But
Mhm.
even in the work I'm doing in coaching and business coaching, I think as human beings, we do have a tendency to be very hard on ourselves. So I think that's quite pervasive in all areas. So I wouldn't say it's the main reason that people come, but it's certainly
Mhm.
evident in all the work that I do with people. There'll definitely be areas where people might be more self-critical about certain things in their life, whether that's stuff that's happening at home or whether that's things in their business. So
Mhm.
it definitely is something that I think as human beings we struggle with a lot.
Mhm. And how do you sort of help people navigate that criticism or the thoughts in their own heads, the the voices that tell them that you should be doing a certain thing or you should be at a certain point in your life? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. So a lot of the work, I guess the fundamental basis of the work I do with people is helping them change the relationship that they have with themselves.
Mhm.
Because I truly believe the relationship we have with ourselves is fundamental to everything that we do.
Hmm.
And in compassion focused therapy, we talk about the three circle model, which is the emotion regulation system. And in that, we have the threat system, which is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Mhm.
And this is what's getting activated when we are being very self critical.
Hmm.
So I'll often say to people, when that's starting to show up and you're starting to notice this more critical or negative voice, thinking about what was happening before that started to show up. And we want to understand when the critic shows up, it's a signal to us that our threat system has been activated.
Hmm.
So, what is it that actually activated the threat system? Is it that you think you're going to get in trouble about something? Is it that you think, the thing you've done is going to be judged negatively by somebody else? As human beings, we have this built-in desire. It's part of our DNA to belong.
Hmm.
Yeah. There's a saying, a lone monkey is a dead monkey. Like we need to be part of our group. And it can feel very threatening if there is any sense that we're going to be rejected from the group.
Hmm.
Even though we don't necessarily go around in small groups anymore. The world has changed very much from what it was like for our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
These things can still get triggered on a biological level. And then we start getting really critical of ourselves. So I would say to people, what was happening and what is motivating what you're doing? Like, are you fearful of judgment? Are you giving yourself a hard time because perhaps you've got to a certain age and there's some societal pressure that says you should be at this stage of your life right now,
Mm-hmm.
which, as we know, are quite arbitrary because people achieve things and people do things at very different stages in life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I went to university as a single mom when I was 32 years old. I dropped out of school at 16.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might say, well, by 32, you should know exactly what you're doing and you should have your career established. You know, I changed my business from being a psychologist to going into coaching and speaking and training and writing when I was in my 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've got to sort of think, well, what is motivating why I think I should be doing this? Or what is motivating me pursuing this particular path? Is it actually values aligned and something that I want for myself?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the messaging we've got from this very patriarchal, capitalist, ableist system that we live within?
And do you think that all these shoulds that we have in our minds of what we should be doing, where we should be at, what's society's definition of being successful, all these things that we think we should be doing, do you think that they keep people sort of stuck in a loop where they want to be in a certain place and live a certain life, but they're living in a different place and living a life to show people on the outside that they're successful and happy?
Oh, absolutely. I think so many people are living lives that actually aren't motivated by what they want.
Mm-hmm.
They're motivated by maybe, you know, perhaps in your younger years or even later, you might be motivated by what your parents might think you should be
Mm-hmm.
doing. You know, when I was doing my PhD, I was tutoring some of the undergrad students,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them were doing psychology because that's what their parents wanted them to do. And they weren't interested, and you could tell they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, there can be this influence from your own family, perhaps the friendship groups you have around you, but there's also a lot of really strong messaging in society,
Mm-hmm.
depending who you are. You know, this is how you should be behaving, this is what you should be doing, this is what success looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And often the things when I work with people, I always say, okay, we need to work with your definition of success, because what success might mean to me could be very, very different to what it means to somebody else. And if we're trying to pursue somebody else's definition of success, even if we were to achieve that, we're not necessarily going to feel satisfied. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's like, what is your own definition of success? And how can you actually reach that success without compromising your well-being?
And how do you think people can go a bit closer to what they really want when they're sort of influenced by all the conditioning that society puts on them?
I think, you know, it's a reflective process. I don't think there's a short answer to that, but certainly getting in touch with your own values, thinking about
Mm-hmm.
what is important and meaningful to you as an individual, spending some time actually reflecting on what is it you're enjoying about your life, what is it you're not enjoying about your life,
Mm-hmm.
even asking yourself, I'm on this path trying to pursue this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whose idea was it that I even got on this path? You know, so I think there's some great questions in my book, From Self-Neglect to Self-Compassion. There's a lot of reflective questions.
Mm-hmm.
It really takes you through what it means to be a human and understand being a human with a tricky mind. Then sort of getting more into what does it mean to be me as the individual that I am,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about the possibilities that we want for our lives, and perhaps what are some of the dreams that you've left, you know, behind because perhaps somebody else didn't think that was a good idea, or you felt the pressure to pursue something else. And then really looking at how we can learn to do things differently so
Mm-hmm.
that we can honor ourselves and live the life we want to be living.
Hmm. My next question is, your book is called From Self Neglect to Self Compassion. Was there ever a period in your life where you had been neglecting yourself subconsciously?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I tell a little bit of my story in the book, but it's
Hmm.
really not a book about me. It is a book for the reader and
Right.
about the reader. But yeah, absolutely. I was very disconnected from myself. I didn't realize I was diagnosed autistic with ADHD at age 52, I think I was. So I had no idea that I was a neurodivergent woman trying to live in a neurotypical world.
Hmm.
And I struggled a lot, but I also didn't want to be connected to myself. I found that quite painful.
Hmm.
So I detached from myself a lot. And
Yeah.
I was very much influenced by other people around me and what I thought I should be doing. And I sort of say to people now, we can want to avoid ourselves because it feels painful. But unfortunately, when we don't have a good relationship with ourselves, we can end up making decisions that actually lead to more pain and suffering anyway.
Mm.
So for me, it really was about changing the relationship that I have with myself
Hmm.
so that I could get to know who I am, what I enjoy, what my own values are,
Hmm.
and live a life that's in alignment with that and allow myself to thrive and work in a way that actually suits who I am.
Hmm. And this is not just directed at you, this is generalized question. When when people are subconsciously or consciously neglecting themselves because of whatever reasons, how do you think that self neglect can show up in their lives? What have you seen in the people that you've worked with? How does it show up in people?
I think in so many different ways. And
Hmm.
I kind of put a bit of a list of examples in the book, but I always say to people, if you don't recognize yourself in the list, have a think about what is showing up for you because we are so different. But it can be things like, if you're a parent, making the lunches for all the people at home, but then when you get to work, you realize you haven't got any lunch. It could be something like, you know, having a reaction to a situation, but then minimizing your own feelings around that because you don't want to rock the boat, you don't want to disturb the peace. It can be making sure everybody else has what they need. They're getting to the health appointments they need, but never actually making time for your own.
Hmm.
Putting off dreams of perhaps traveling somewhere or starting your own business or whatever your dream might be. It can be little things where you're just not stopping to think about what is it that I need in this moment.
Hmm.
I think particularly as women, we are socialized from a very young age to
Hmm.
think about the other person.
Hmm.
Yeah. Like we're given the tea set and the doll with the nappy and the bottle. And this is so young and it's probably with no ill intention at all. But what it does is it says you are here for the service of other people.
Hmm.
And society continues to tell us this. So it makes total sense to me that actually people are very much focused on the other and not on themselves.
Hmm.
But then it can be that you're skipping appointments. It might just be you don't get to the hairdresser because you keep putting off going to the hairdresser, or you're not making sure you're stopping to have a glass of water or have something to eat. I mean, it really can show up in so many different ways.
And do you think that this is somewhat manifesting as people pleasing behaviors, just putting off looking after yourself but looking after everyone around you? Do you think that's how it manifests sometimes?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of that. A lot of people who, are self-confessed people pleasers or recovering people pleasers. And again, as a human being, it can feel really risky if we feel like we're going to be rejected from a group.
Mm-hmm.
So we can be on the lookout, and depending on your own kind of history and the things you've been through in life, this can be more heightened. Like people with a trauma history can
Mm-hmm.
be really hyper vigilant to reading the room, reading other people. What do they need? How am I going to keep this person happy?
Mm-hmm.
so I can keep myself safe. Yeah. And with others, it might just be that you've that's just been really normalized that maybe you were the child who, if your parents had people over, perhaps you were the child, it was like, go and get everybody a piece of cake, or, go and bring the things in for the tea, help take the coats, whatever it might be. It could
Mm-hmm.
just be simple things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're kind of compounded and we never stop to question any of it, it becomes our normal. So we don't actually think, a lot of people will say, why did you use the term self neglect? It's
Mm-hmm.
not a term we really use.
Mm-hmm.
One, the book title came to me. I didn't really choose the book title, the book chose the title. But also, I think it's important that we recognize this is neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Like if, for example, had a child and we never gave them any water and we didn't give them food during the day,
Mm-hmm.
if they were distressed and upset and we just completely ignored their feelings, we're
Mm-hmm.
neglectful of them. So it's the same for us. We just don't tend to acknowledge that.
I think this is how I think, is that also when you see or hear the word self neglect, you think that someone is physically unkept.
Yeah.
They haven't showered, or their hair is not clean, or they're not well put together. But sometimes someone can look completely well put together and be clean and still be incredibly neglected.
Yeah, and I talk about this in the book about how it might be, you're not showering or cleaning your teeth or whatever, but also all those things might be happening, but
Hmm.
all these other things that we don't pay attention to, we can't necessarily see. Like if somebody, for an example, was in a situation where their feelings kept getting hurt,
Hmm.
but they just downplayed that and they
Hmm.
never say, what you're doing is hurting my feelings, and they just kind of suppress that and don't deal with it,
Hmm.
they're neglecting themselves. But nobody can see that. Yeah.
And what tips do you have for someone to sort of come out of this on top and say, I'm not tolerating it anymore, and start to prioritize themselves when they haven't ever done that?
This can be really hard. And I acknowledge that because I went through this. Like, I know what this journey feels like. And I know that it's not just as easy as saying, just change the relationship with yourself, be more compassionate.
Hmm.
It takes practice. It first of all takes a willingness to want to try and do that.
Hmm.
That in itself can feel really scary. So I always say to people, like, go gently.
Hmm.
You don't need to make all these changes overnight, and you're not going to be able to make these changes overnight.
Hmm.
I use the example as of when I was wanting to change the relationship with myself. I thought about it in terms of, if I was to meet somebody that I wanted to get to know,
Hmm.
what would I do? And I would ask questions of them. I'd ask them what they like. I'd ask them about their interests. And then I'd pay attention and I'd listen to the answers. And that's what I did with myself. And I think this is what we have to do. And that takes time. And it's an ongoing process. I started this journey quite a few years ago. And then I got my acknowledgement that I'm a neurodivergent woman about 3 years ago. And that in itself has been another process of trying to understand, what does that mean for me in the way I live and work as well. So it's not really we kind of do this work and that's it, we forget about it. We have to remember that as we go through life and when we're in different circumstances, we change and we evolve. So we want to keep this relationship like we would with any relationship. We have to grow with ourselves. If you're in a relationship with somebody else, they change over time, you change over time,
Hmm.
you check in with each other, you kind of keep an eye on that, right? And you nurture that relationship. And that's what we have to do with ourselves as well. So I always say, start small and realize this isn't something you need to change overnight, but it could be as simple as just asking yourself if you're willing to be with yourself and ask, how do I feel in this moment? And what do I actually think I need? And you might not know right then. I mean, you might say, well, actually, now I notice it, I feel really thirsty. I'm going to get a glass of water. It might be something bigger that you need, and you're not quite sure how to articulate that yet. And that's okay. But keep checking in and practicing being with yourself.
And when it comes to the change in career, the leap that you made, I think that's also something that requires a lot of confidence. And how would you advise people if they're stuck in situations that aren't working out for them to sort of have that faith and try something else or walk away from it? How would you tell people to do that?
So I would say I don't necessarily think it takes a lot of confidence.
Mm,
I think it takes courage
mm,
because we might not feel confident.
mhm,
I was a single parent. I left a domestic violence relationship when my son was an infant. I didn't feel confident at all. I was terrified.
mm,
But I knew that I had to make a change for my son. So for me, the motivation wasn't necessarily taking care of me, it was taking care of my son,
mhm,
which allowed me to then take care of me. But if it was, say, in a context of something like you're in a job that you know that you've really not been enjoying, it was never really the career you wanted, and you want to change, I don't think you have to feel confident because you probably won't feel confident. But is there a willingness to take the risk? And the leap takes courage. And one of the things I think can be really helpful is developing this compassionate relationship with yourself, because at the heart of compassion is courage, strength, and wisdom. And when we have a more compassionate relationship with ourselves, it's almost like, okay, I can take this leap. I actually don't know if things are going to work out.
mm.
You can make it obviously some judgments based on whatever it is that you're doing. You can make some educated guesses on how things are going to go, but none of us know really how things are going to go. But when there's a compassionate relationship with yourself, I think it gives you, perhaps this is where it gives you the confidence that if this doesn't go as planned, I know I'm going to be okay. And I always talk to people. One of my favorite things I say to myself and my clients is my favorite thing about choice is you can always make another choice. So if you do choose to do something and it doesn't quite work out, like we can only make decisions based on the information we have at the time, right?
True.
So you make the decision, you make the change, then you get some new information and go, actually, this probably wasn't the best decision. We can make another choice. And I also preface with that, I always acknowledge my own privilege because not everybody has the same types of choices, resources, skills accessible to them. Um, so within what you can do, you can make different choices.
And do you think that with enough self work and compassion, one can actually reach a point where they're immune to the judgments and criticisms of the people around them?
That's a really interesting one, isn't it? I don't think we can ever stop people around you judging and criticizing because people will do that.
Hmm.
But for me, I come back to a place now, and I don't know if this is from, age. I'm 56. I think certainly does come with age. You do start to care less about what other people think and more about what you think. But also the relationship I've developed with myself, with this compassionate relationship, it comes to people are going to think what they want, people are going to say what they want, and people are going to do what they want because
Hmm.
that's just the nature of humans, right? When we have a more solid relationship with ourselves, it is easier
Mm,
to ask yourself, well, why does that matter to me, what they think?
mm,
Do I want to live my life based on what other people think I should be doing? Now, there's also going to be situations where, depending who's doing the saying, and the criticizing and the judging. Hearing that from some people is always going to be harder than hearing it from other people. Yeah. If it's some random troll on the internet, like, honestly, why would you care? Live your life and do the things you want to do, because the random troll on the internet really doesn't care anyway. They're just entertaining themselves.
The hiding,
Yeah.
on the internet.
Yeah. So, but it could be somebody really close to you, and that could feel really painful
Mhm.
if they think that, you're not living life the way they think you should, or they're criticizing you for something. But again, as far as we know, we get one precious life. Do we really want to be living it based on other people's opinions? Or do we want to be living it based on what is right for us? And I spent my life trying to be a chameleon, trying to
Mm,
behave in the way I thought other people needed me to or wanted me to behave, how I thought I should be doing things. And it was a disaster. And I was really unhappy. Since really connecting with my values, changing the relationship with myself, and thinking about, how do I want to live my life? My life is so much more fulfilling. It feels more meaningful. I'm married, so of course I discuss these things. I don't just say to my husband, well, this is how I'm going to live my life. Get on board or don't. We have joint conversations about how we want life to look. But it's just, we can spend so much time thinking about what other people might think. And the reality is, most people aren't thinking about us much anyway.
mhm. If you could go back in time and you go back to a point where you didn't have the tools or the relationship with yourself to do these things, what would you tell yourself when you were younger?
If I could go back there, well, first of all, I would tell my younger self, you are enough, and you always have been.
Mhm.
And also to acknowledge the unhappiness, like, acknowledge how unhappy you are.
Mm,
And then to learn how to ask for help as well, because that can be something that's really hard. I talk about this in the book as well. There's so many barriers to people asking for help for all sorts of reasons, systemic reasons, personal reasons. That can be really tricky, but we don't have to do this. We're not designed as human beings to do things all by ourselves either. But that fear of judgment can show up. We can carry shame about things. So it can be really hard.
mm,
But again, it's these practices. And the piece with compassion is, when we think about compassion, there's three flows of compassion. There's
mm,
the compassion that we give out to other people. And most people I know and have ever met in my life are really, really good at that.
mhm,
Sometimes to the point that they're doing that so much that there is nothing left for themselves.
mhm,
Then there's the self-compassion, the compassion we give to ourselves, and really developing that self-compassionate relationship is so, so powerful. But then there's also the flow of compassion from somebody else to us.
mm,
That one can be really tricky for people. When we think about how good it can feel to help somebody else, we need to remember it actually feels good for those other people to help us as well.
mm.
If somebody's offering help, we need to also learn how to receive it, so that we don't have to navigate this all by ourselves.
That's very well said. And do you think that the point in time that we're at now, it's easier to ask for help and talk about these issues than it was maybe 20, 30 years ago?
To some degree, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I still think for some people, asking for help can be really, really challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And also, sometimes people don't know what help they need. I
Mm,
know sometimes in the work that I do with people, people come for a particular reason, but then as we start to talk, it's like, oh, I didn't even know I needed that. So we don't always know what we need. But the more conversations we have around the types of societies we're living in, the issues people have with mental health, all these conversations that can start to de-shame and destigmatize so many things that have been kept in the dark for so long is always going to be a helpful thing. And that's certainly where for me, I'm really happy to share about my own story, my own history. I've done a lot of my own therapy. I've done a lot of my own self-work and reflection. I'm in a place where I feel very healed,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm really happy to share my own experiences because I know that it helps other people. And I think the more we can have conversations like this, the more helpful it's going to be for people. If we can normalize talking about everything, well, then people don't have to worry so much. If we can talk about one example, I'm 56. I went through menopause probably 8 years ago now,
Mm-hmm.
at which point the term perimenopause was not even mentioned.
Mm.
Nobody was talking about it. It was this thing your mother went through when she was old, and that was about it. Now there's so much information, there's so many conversations that people are now having these conversations more and more, which is fantastic because what happens is we then get access to the information we need, we have access to the help we need, and there's less suffering for everybody.
I completely agree. Do you have any more experiences that you'd like to share in terms of situations that are are relevant and common, but people don't often speak up about because of fear of being judged or of being ashamed?
Look, I think, for me, I went through a really significant burnout in 2016. And again, people weren't talking about burnout. We first
Mhm.
defined burnout in 1970. That's in the 1970s. I was born in 1970. And it saddens me that the definition was back in the 70s. And here we are seeing rates of burnout just increasing everywhere.
Mhm.
This is another thing where, and I was a psychologist at the time, so I had a lot of shame thinking like I should know what I'm doing. I should be able to manage this myself.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's lots of people in workplaces and also in other situations where there's lots of struggling, they're burning out, they're struggling with mental health concerns, and it's not being spoken about because people fear that they're going to be seen as incompetent or weak, or they're not cut out for the job, or whatever it might be. And again, we need more and more of these kind of open and honest conversations so people feel like they can address what's happening for them. Because when I will use this example is if you're starting to feel like you're burning out, or you're just starting to get a bit tired, things aren't really going so well, it's almost like if something was starting to smolder, you could get a glass of water and you could throw it on that and it would put it out. And that's a pretty easy fix. But if you don't do anything about it and it catches fire, and then you've got this roaring fire, a glass of water is going to do nothing. You've got to call the fire brigade. And that's a much bigger event. So if we are struggling with something and we can intervene early, then we're going to be able to sort that out in a way that takes less time, less energy, less money, less resources. If it gets to the point where it's really significant, it's going to cost you more in health, time, money, resources, relationships, all sorts of stuff.
And did you at that point try to speak to anyone about how you were feeling? Any colleagues or any friends or family? What was it received as?
I did eventually. I had gone back to university. I was recovering from a domestic violence relationship. I was a single mum of a very small child. I think when I went to uni, my son was 3. So I was in survival mode and I was head down, just get on with it.
Mm.
As things progressed, I'd probably been like on a slow burnout for a long time. And also now knowing that I'm neurodivergent, I was probably having periods of autistic burnout in amongst that as well.
Mhm.
Eventually, I did speak to people. I spoke to my supervisor, I had a therapist, I spoke to my GP.
Mhm.
I'd remarried at this point as well. I spoke to my husband. And that's when I could start to really kind of recover and give myself what I needed and learn to ask for the help that I needed. But I left it a long time. And this is why I'm really, really passionate about burnout prevention. So a lot of the work I do with people is, create success. I love to see, especially women, I love seeing women succeed in the world in whatever way that means for them. But it's always got to be not at the cost of your well-being. Like, we need to honor your well-being. We need to ensure that we're preventing burnout in these processes, because it can be absolutely brutal and it can take so much from you.
I agree. I completely agree. And there's this sort of message we receive in society that, if you stop or you take a break, or you leave the situation that's burning you out, that you're quitting. And
Yeah,
it's not quitting. It's taking a break to heal from the situation that burnt you out in the first place.
absolutely. It's wisdom is what it is. And then what we've got to remember is we can't just kind of take the break, recover, and then go back to exactly the situation and circumstances. Like, something has to change, or we'll just get on this kind of loop of burnout, recover, burnout, recover. So we need to understand that, okay, what do I need to change about myself, but also what has to change within the system that I'm in as well. And that can be the harder part, because we don't always have control over the systemic stuff.
True.
Um, and for some people, it might be, I need to leave. If you're working for an organization and they really don't have a good culture, it might be, I need to leave there. If they're not willing to make any changes for their employees, then maybe I need to move and find something else. And again, I acknowledge that not everybody can just do that. This is why it's so hard. We really need workplaces to understand the importance and the benefit, to the bottom line at the end of the day, of taking care of employees. Because when we take care of people and we don't have them burning out and feeling frazzled and overwhelmed, they perform better, and then your business does better.
True. I agree. Any last messages for our listeners today, Haley?
Just to know that, like I said earlier, you are enough and your needs really matter. It's so important that we take care of ourselves. And I just hope that, if somebody listening is at a place where they recognize that they're really not paying attention to themselves and taking care of their needs, that they could just do something small for themselves, perhaps sometime this week, that would give them that message that actually I do matter and my needs do matter, because it can be very different.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all your experiences. It's been incredibly helpful.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Peppy podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode. Bye.